Before the world knew her as a scientist, Rana Dajani was a child listening to her family's stories. Stories of displacement, of trauma, of rebuilding, and of choosing hope again and again. Those early memories didn't fade, they grew into questions, and those questions became a journey that led her to one of the most remarkable discoveries in modern biology. For decades, the science of generational trauma lived mostly in studies on mice and rats, important but far from human experience. Then Dr. Dajani changed the landscape by working with their own community and tracing the biological echoes of lived experiences across generations. She became the first to demonstrate these epigenetic effects in humans, showing that not just trauma travels through our genes, but so does resilience. Today I had the chance to connect with this very person, Dr. Rana Dajani. Dr. Dajani is a professor in molecular biology and a pioneering epigenetics researcher. She's the founder of the global We Love Reading initiative and has received more than 20 major international awards. She's also been recognized among the world's most influential Arab women. Her work stands at the intersection of lived experience and science. She's also the author of multiple books, including her book called Five Scarves, which challenges the narrative of what a woman should be and reflects the 5 roles she balances in life: mother, teacher, scientist, social entrepreneur, and feminist. I'm honored to have her here today as my guest to share her groundbreaking research and personal journey. I hope you enjoy our conversation. It means a lot that you're taking time out of your day to talk to me, and you're a great inspiration to me. I've read your book, and everything I see of you online is just such an inspirational work that you're putting out there. So thank you. And I'm really excited to talk to you.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast. And I'm always excited to meet new people from all over the world, from different ages, to learn from you, because we'll learn till the last minute of our life.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like a lot of people by now have heard of the term the body keeps the score. And it's a term that's just thrown out there. But I would like to actually understand on a biological level what that means. And when we compare the relationship between trauma and biology, what can we actually find? So I would really like to talk to you about that because of the research you have done. But I would also like to get to know you on a more personal level first. I read that you were born to a Palestinian father and a Syrian mother who were both refugees. And how did those experiences of your parents influence the way you were raised?
That's a very profound question.
Yeah.
I think being a daughter of a Palestinian, especially refugee, who fled Jerusalem in 1948 because of persecution of Zionist forces and fear of extermination, which happened to many people, which today we call the Nakba. And unfortunately, that was not just one event, it's a continuous experience of people who either stayed in Palestine or fled, and is being repeated every day, especially today in Gaza with the genocide that is unfolding as we speak. So whether it was hearing the stories passed down from my grandmother and my father of the harrowing events, or listening to relatives and friends and family members who are going through those events today as we speak, has shaped to me a purpose for existence in life. And I think as human beings, as a species, we have evolved and survived and thrived because of multiple traits, but I think most importantly are 3. One of them is having a purpose in life. This is what wakes you up in the morning, that keeps you going, that if things happen, suffering, injustice, or things that are beyond your control, it gives you a reason to exist. And that is so important for mental health and for being able to cope with life and adapt. So to me, that's an evolutionary thing. And therefore, I grew up with this purpose of finding justice, of finding equity and equality for not just for people in Palestine, but all over the world. Because what I've come to realize growing up is that all the struggles that we see around us and read around us, from racism to inequality in America, rise of the far right, human rights all over the world, climate change, and the hegemony of corporations, and now today when we talk about technology and the misuse of data, all of these are struggles and injustices that are all related. And I see the manifestation of them, or the epitome, is Palestine.
Yeah.
Because Although we think that colonialism has ended and the world is in a better place, it really hasn't.
No.
It's hiding under a veneer of civilization, which the whole trope of civilization was a colonial trope to say some people are better than others. And we see it today, the dehumanization of certain people compared to others. And I think that has been the underlying conversation in my life growing up, on one hand. On the other hand, the second thing that makes us human, that also I grew up on, is curiosity. We have a mind and a brain that encourages us to always ask questions. And you see this so clearly in little children who are always asking questions. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's the family or the education system or the broader society that crushes that curiosity
So
as the
how was it
child grows up.
stimulated when you were growing up? Like, how was your curiosity sparked?
Yeah, so for me, we grew up in a family where the brain and mind was celebrated,
Mm.
both as an Islamic, I'm a Muslim, and I grew up in a Muslim household. And to us, Islam was all about celebrating the mind, that we are
Mm.
obligated to use it. We are obligated to ask questions. That's part of being a good person, a good Muslim.
Yeah.
And my father was a physician and scientist, so to him, asking questions was a joy. It was the game of the
Yeah.
day. And there was no red tape on any question. The idea
Mhm.
was, if you're curious and you have a burning question, to go ask it, pursue it. And also I draw from my faith is that what matters is only your intention. So if your intention is to learn, then ask any question you want. And nobody can judge your intention. That's not for
Mm.
anyone to do. And so that's a license to ask questions. And the last part about asking questions is that it's okay to ask a question and then find an answer, and that answer turns out to be wrong, because you get two rewards if your answer is correct, and you get one reward if your answer is wrong, because the reward is for the sincerity in pursuing knowledge and information. So to me, these are all licenses to keep on asking questions, exploring, without fear of failure or fear of making something a mistake or something wrong. And I think that's how I was brought up. And that's what kind of opened my mind to always keep on asking questions and to encourage others to ask questions. And I think that combination of asking questions, therefore being humble, and feeling that this is an obligation as being a Muslim, kind of opens the whole world. And it reminds me of the saying by a Nobel Prize physicist who said, a scientist is somebody who sees what everybody sees but thinks what no one has thought. I think
Mm.
that's an innate quality of humans, that we are all different. Nobody is like anyone else. Nobody's DNA today is like anyone who existed in the past or today or in the future. And therefore, we all come fresh and new to this world with a new perspective. And so it's wow, we all have something to contribute
Yeah.
and build on those who came before us. We're not denying them, but we can come always with a new perspective, a new way of seeing things that is fascinating to me. And it's like being on a roller coaster that never ends of excitement. What's the next meeting? What's the next question? What's the next discovery going to be?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what were the kind of things you were curious about as a child? Like, I can imagine you were curious about everything, but were there certain themes that always came back?
So I was always curious about nature, trying to
Mm.
explore and understand what's happening. Mostly, I think, the universe. I was very curious about
Yeah.
astronomy. I think in another life I may have become astronomer. I was fascinated with the physics of it, trying to understand. And from that kind of meta level, my interest was also very in the particular. So I was interested in how molecules and atoms connect and bind and get attracted to each other, and what does that mean in a cell in terms of how cells work, how does our body work in nature around us, the different animals and plants. So I was very much interested in those. And to me, maybe I thought I won't be able to go out into the universe and maybe visit Mars, but at least I could dive into a cell and try
Yeah.
to understand what's happening there. But also at the same time, since my father was a physician and I'm the eldest of 8 girls, the assumption was, and this is in our tradition, is that you're the eldest, you're going to go and become a physician like your dad. Initially, I thought I was going to be a physician, but then after my freshman year, I decided I didn't want to be a physician. I was afraid of making a mistake and harming somebody by mistake. But at the same time, I thought, you know what? The most important person is not the physician. The most important person is the scientist who discovers the mechanisms of nature, of biology, and then offer that to the physician to use it as a diagnostic tool. So really, we, the scientists, are the most important people.
Yeah.
And so I became a scientist in the sense that I could help people, help humanity, while satisfying my curiosity and adventure seeking in trying to go inside the cells to understand how they talk to each other and how molecules interact and how we are today living in this world.
Because why do you think that in particular was interesting to you?
Because of curiosity, I wanted to find the answer to everything. And of course, when you ask one question, instead of answering that question, you end up with 10 more new questions. And I think that never ending chain of questions was very, very enticing.
Yeah.
And that's why people say I go to work. I don't go to work. I have fun. Yeah, I have fun every day, and it's a party that never ends. Which what could be better than that? And I think this is also like an invitation. People need to do what they have a passion for. Then life is never work. It's always play and fun. And you will do better. And the quality of what you share with the world will be higher because you're doing it out of a passion, not because you're being paid or because you have to answer to somebody. And that's so important. And especially today, with the rise of technology and AI and everybody saying there won't be any jobs, I see the silver lining in that, that finally we are free to pursue what we like and create our own paths without having to do the menial stuff that now an AI or technology can do. So in a way, it's freeing, and it's an invitation to a new phase of how the world will look when we pursue our passions.
Yeah. So, like you said, like your academic work started with biology and molecular biology in particular. Um, why do you think you were drawn to the molecular biology and not plants or something different? Like, why molecules?
That's a good question. I'm fascinated with the whole spectrum, right? From the molecule to the organism to the ecosystem itself, because you cannot understand one without the other. They are all interconnected. And so maybe today we see the world divided into disciplines, into categories. But that is something I think that was adopted in the past in an attempt to understand nature. But this approach is very limiting. That's what we see today. And nature is all a continuum. So I discard all these discipline boundaries and let my curiosity take me wherever it is. So I started with molecules because to me, my undergrad was in biology. So I studied plants, I studied animals, and I was fascinated by all the different types of plants and animals. And of course, the underlying theme of all of that is evolution. How these diversity of living things came to be is all because of evolution and natural selection and the manifestation of all of that. But to me, I wanted, again, my curiosity is why, how. And if you're going to answer the how and the why, you need to go down at the level of molecules to understand how these different creatures evolved. How are one plant species is different from the other? Why one can resist heat while the other can't, for example? Why did this organism look this way or behave this way? The answer always lies in the molecules, in the cells of those organisms. So if you really want to get to the bottom of things, you have to go to the level of the molecules.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the kind of newer things I feel like in the science world or what I read when I read books is epigenetics. I feel like it's kind of a hot topic, but for people who are not familiar with epigenetics, could you explain in simple terms what that means?
Oh, absolutely. And as you said, this is a new trend, a new discovery, very hot, very interesting. In life, we look at ourselves as human beings, or any creature for that matter, but we're talking about humans. The way we manifest in the world, the way who we are in the world, is a product of two things: what we inherit from our parents, the genes that pass on to us, on one hand, but also the environment we interact with from the minute we are conceived as one cell, a zygote, to until we die. We are interacting with different experiences around us, whether what we eat, what we drink, what we listen to, what you're listening to in this podcast. Everything impacts you and impacts your biology. And what does that mean is that your body, your cells, your molecules respond to those experiences in different ways. And one of them is that the genes in your cells can be turned on or off as a result of being exposed to such experiences. And that's what we call epigenetics. So your DNA itself does not change, but the genes that are turned on or off can change as a result of those experiences. So as you listen to me, maybe I'm turning on or off some of your genes. So be careful if you want to continue.
Yeah. So if you have the nature versus nurture debate, it's actually built on the wrong premise that it's one against the other. It's more of an interaction, as you said it.
Absolutely. And again, that's back to the point that everything is connected. You cannot say, oh, this is only nature, genetics, or this is only nurture from the environment. It's a continuous conversation throughout your lifetime and even beyond your lifetime. Because what we have proven is that some of those epigenetic changes can actually be transferred to future generations. And that's very interesting. And the implications of it are profound.
Mm. So how is that possible? Could you give like an example of like how maybe like a grandparent or great grandparent went through something and then the great grandchild still has that in their DNA expression?
So this question in particular of if I as a human being am exposed to a particular experience, what are the genes that are turned on and off? And then whether that change can be transferred to future generations. Now, that question has been answered in mice, in worms, because it's easier to conduct experiments in those animal models or worm models than it is in humans. Because to really prove it, you would have to divide a group of humans into two. One, you expose them to a particular experience and then wait for 3 generations and to see if the changes were transferred, and then have another group that has not been exposed to that experience and then follow them for 3 generations. So that's a long time, and epigenetics was just discovered recently, the concept of it. And then to really see an epigenetic signature, we said any experience will have a signature, yes, but to really see it, since this is very new and we don't know what we're looking for, to prove the principle, you would need to look for a very dramatic experience. And so that piqued my curiosity, right?
Yeah,
Oh
of
my
course.
God, I want to answer this question. I know it's tough, it's difficult, we can't do those experiences. But again, I suddenly remembered from my experience with my relatives, from my mother, from my Syrian side. So in 1982, there was a massacre by the Assad regime, the dictatorship in Syria, where they killed over 20,000 people, and many more were tortured, and many more were who fled the city and left. Of course, this was not in the public realm because this was 1982. There was no social media. But I knew of it because many of my mother's relatives actually fled to Jordan, where I was living, and stayed at our house. So I heard firsthand the stories that they told us of what they had witnessed in terms of violence of the oppressors to their husbands, to their brothers, their sons, their fathers, or themselves, the woman. And so I was a teenager then. And now I'm grown up and I'm a scientist, and suddenly I remembered that. And I thought, wait a minute, if I can find those women who were pregnant in 1982, who were exposed to this violent experience of trauma, of war, I can actually take a sample from them, their daughters and their granddaughters, and try to trace if there is an epigenetic signature that is transferred. And because I know the whole community, I needed a control group. I knew that there were some women from the same city who were not living in the city during that time. And therefore, I found them and their daughters and their granddaughters. So that served as a control. And then I also introduced even a third group, because this is something very dramatic and very profound. And in order to prove it, you need to be very precise, very accurate, and have a very smart design to ensure that what your results come up with can be very accurately related to the traumatic experience that the woman had experienced. So I chose a third group where the mother, who was pregnant in 1982, was not in the city, but her daughter was pregnant in 2011 during the civil uprising, when the regime again did another atrocities and war and violence. So I had this kind of middle group to compare with, right? So we had the perfect, elegant, intricate design to answer the question that would have only come around because I knew the community and I'm a scientist, right? So I had the right combination. And that's a call out that good science can only be done well when the scientist is from the community itself, not from outside the community coming in, because they will not understand what is the community about, what are those experiences, what is the history of it, in addition to gaining the trust. Now, so people opened up and allowed me and my team to actually take samples, because we were collecting samples over a period of 10 years, since 2015. And the dictator regime was still in power. So people trusted us and shared their stories with us, because we had to take from them what is the trauma that they were exposed to. They shared DNA samples with us. We took cheek swabs. And all this was built on trust that I am one of them, and that together we want to understand what happened to our bodies, and so that we can know how to handle this in the future. And then, as they said later, to hold our perpetrators accountable for the violence that they had done to the grandmothers and then the mothers, and of course impacting the grandchildren as well. And so what happened is that we collected over 10 years the samples. Because my university is in Jordan, we don't have the sophisticated resources to actually do the epigenetic analysis. I collaborated with two groups in the US, one from Yale to help in measuring the trauma, because I'm not an anthropologist. I'm a biologist, epigenetics person, and then collaborated with an epigenetics lab at the University of Florida so that we could do the epigenetic analysis there. And indeed, that's what happened. And we published our work this year, 2025, in February, which was the anniversary of the massacre, the 42nd anniversary of the massacre. So it was very timely. And the Assad regime had fell in December 24. So people were able to celebrate and talk freely about what had happened and discuss it and share it and feel good about the results and how they can use them for the future.
So what were the results of your research?
So the results were multiple. The first result was that we were able to show that the women who were pregnant in 1982 and had been exposed to the violence of trauma, of war, were able to pass down to their grandchildren 14 sites on their genome that had an epigenetic signature. And this is the first ever in humans to prove that an epigenetic signature of trauma can be transferred to the grandchildren who themselves have not been exposed to trauma. So that's the first discovery. The second discovery is that the fetuses in the wombs of the women who were pregnant and were exposed to the violence of trauma, we were able to show that they had accelerated epigenetic aging, which is the first again. Although the mothers themselves did not have accelerated epigenetic aging, neither did the grandchildren. It was only the fetus. And
what do you mean by epigenetic aging?
So what we have in our bodies is a biological clock, right? And that is a measure of how fast we are aging. There's another clock, which is an epigenetic clock, which should correlate with the biological clock as a measure of how much we age. Now, certain experiences can accelerate that epigenetic clock and therefore accelerate deterioration of our bodies and our aging. And that particular clock, we used 3 different clocks and measured them, and we found that those were accelerated compared to normal controls who were not exposed to violence. So the implications of both of these discoveries are profound. The implications of this discovery of the prenatal accelerated epigenetic aging clock is profound for women who are pregnant in conflict zones. Think of the genocide in Gaza. Tens of thousands of women have been pregnant and delivered without anesthesia in terrible conditions. Think of the accelerated epigenetic aging of these fetuses who are born, and what does that mean on the future of the next generation of people, of children in Gaza? How do we use this to hold the perpetrator accountable so that we want to stop the violence, we want to stop the war? We all know that it's bad, but now we have extra evidence to show how that will impact future generations. The implication of the first discovery of the 14 sites that were passed on to the third generation, the implications of that, first of all, begs the question, what do these 14 sites do in the genome that have been changed? So we looked into all the biological pathways to search for those 14 sites, and we were not able to find them in any of the known biological pathways. And as all biological pathways are related to disease, because we only study disease, right? So neither pathways for cardiovascular, diabetes, immune system, cancer, nothing. So that made me sit back and reflect. If these sites that have been altered as a result of exposure to violence and passed down, escaping erasure to the third generation. And they're not related to any negative health outcomes, as far as we know. Then what could it mean? What could they mean? So I began reflecting on, first of all, why do we only study negative outcomes? Why does the science work that way? And second, from an evolutionary perspective, we have been in wars and strife since humans evolved, at least 200,000 years ago. Why all of a sudden the inheritors of, or the next generations of people who were exposed to violence and trauma are called victims? Because if it's happening for so long, we should all be victims today. But why are only some people who are part of some populations considered victims, while others are not considered victims? So to me, this kind of stank of a colonial trope, right? First, they occupy us and colonize us. And now, since that stopped, at least in some places, it hasn't stopped in Palestine, they want to come in and save us from the atrocities they have given us in the name of saving, or the savior complex.
Yeah.
And so they call us victims, and they come in to help us, which is another covering up of colonialism in a different way. They are the civilized. They want to civilize us. They are the only ones capable to help us because we are all victims and therefore helpless. And to me, it's, oh my God, this is all a framing and a narrative. And if that was true, I should have seen a different result in my biological epigenetic research, but I didn't. So to me, that is an indicator or an opportunity, let's say, to propose a hypothesis. Can we think of a new framework where people who have gone through violence and trauma survive and pass down to their grandchildren, not victimhood and vulnerability, rather adaptability and agency to cope with a future that is unpredictable? That makes much more sense from an evolutionary perspective. It makes more sense from the people I see around me, myself, a daughter of refugees, that we are capable, we can cope. That doesn't mean we will have some people who need special attention because of mental disorders or cardiovascular or other complex diseases, but that doesn't mean it is a destiny that we all have to subscribe to. And I think this is very important. And when I shared this with the mothers and grandmothers of the Syrian community that I worked with, they were so happy and so open because that gave them hope.
Yeah.
That they're not forever caught in this cycle of violence, that their evolution traits that they have inherited can actually open a whole new door of opportunity.
Yeah.
And this, what also leads from this is this framing, this shift in framing, how this will impact research, interventions, policies on the long run, and actually help in mental health. Because as I was speaking with a colleague from Africa, she was saying, oh my God, we've always been trained that we're victims. So we need to unlearn that victimhood mentality so that we can come up with better solutions. Because being a victim is in itself detrimental to our mental health.
Yeah.
Just thinking it, right? It propagates that feeling of helplessness. Which brings me to the third quality that we have inherited that makes us human. I had mentioned curiosity, and I had mentioned briefly this agency, this feeling that that I'm not a victim. I can solve my own problems. I can ask for help, but I have the capacity. This mindset of I can is so important. And most international NGOs, when they come on with all their programming, in all good intention, they're actually promoting this concept of I can't and I'm waiting for somebody to save me. And having agency, waking up in the morning to take care of your kids, to cook a meal, to go out in the world and pursue something is so important for our mental health, which is important for our survival. And that is part of healing and taking care of ourselves. And we see it today. If we look at the people in Gaza, how they have survived despite the genocide, despite the atrocities, the continuous atrocities that has been going on for decades, they always come up and rebuild and keep going. And to me, that's another question. Like how, right? How does that happen? With all the framing of victimhood, you think this is like a miracle. What's going on? But nobody studies it because people are stuck in this mentality of victimhood. Because when you go in, you know what you see, that the reason they have strived and survived? It's because of meaning making, or in other words, faith, having a cause, having a purpose, that they are part of something bigger, that they are part of a cause. That is so important for survival. And that's what keeps them going. It's, as one person said, it's suffering for a reason that keeps you going. That doesn't destroy you. But suffering for no reason is what destroys the spirit. And they have a reason. But again, this reason is drawn from their faith. But everybody in the scientific world is scared to even study or come close to faith because they have their own problem with faith. As one scientist told me, I said, if you have a problem with faith, you cannot impose that problem on everybody else. I don't have a problem with faith. It actually helps me. So why should I deny myself or deny others their usage of faith, which is actually another evolutionary thing we have inherited, meaning making?
Yeah.
To keep us alive. We need to study it. We need to understand it so we can develop better interventions and help others develop better solutions to cope with atrocities, injustices that are happening all over the world. And that's why I call all of this my grandmother's wisdom that has been passed on from my grandmother to future generations as well.
Yeah. So to kind of paraphrase what you're saying, it's like, could you say that maybe it could be a prediction that if someone goes through trauma, but they have a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose in life, and they have the mindset of I can instead of I can't, or I'm resilient, I can survive this, that it has a different effect on what kind of diseases they might be prone to, or like the epigenetics effect on their genes?
To me, that's a hypothesis that I put forward. We don't have enough evidence to prove it, but it's a framing I like to propose, I believe in. We see it, but the thing is, we need to do the scientific research to prove it. And by the way, a lot of good science is actually taking common sense and just proving it.
And literally
Honestly,
what?
this is what it's all about. But also, it is going against the current. The current is all about negative victimhood. And people sometimes misunderstand this and say, oh, so you are celebrating trauma. And I say, no, I am not celebrating trauma.
You
Violence is
celebrate the
bad.
human.
Exactly. Violence is bad and we need to stop it and we need to put an end to it because it does have negative outcomes, right? We see it in the acceleration of the epigenetic aging clock in the fetus. But when we talk about the long term, we cope and survive, and we want to celebrate the human to bring back the dignity of humanity. And I think part of bringing back the dignity and the humanity of everyone, and that we are all equal, this will be the way to stop atrocities, because atrocities happen because of inequality, because some people say some are more equal than others, or when we say never again for some but not for others. By bringing back dignity and humanity, we are saying we are all the same. When we say the violence is bad, it's bad for everybody. And as a daughter of somebody who has been exposed to violence, I get to say who I am and how I cope. And the oppressor cannot step in and suddenly feel guilty to say, you can't say that.
Exactly. Because it's a question I've been wondering about lately, especially I wanted to ask you since you're a Palestinian, is like, let's say if you're a child now in Gaza and you've lost your family and your family's been through everything since 48 and you don't have a lot left, but you're a child and you're still stuck there, you're still being colonized, you're still being violently oppressed. How much of a chance does a child like that have to have the mindset of, oh, I'm capable of doing great things, or I'm allowed to live my own life according to my own rule? Like, what's your perspective on that?
So I think for a child in Gaza, a child is not isolated from her or his community. In Gaza, we have extended families. Yes, unfortunately, many of them have been killed, obliterated. Whole lineages have been gone. But the concept of community is very, very deep. And
Mm.
so this child is not alone. There are other families around him or her taking care of them. And that's one of the other qualities that we have inherited as a species and why we survived, because of community. We didn't survive because we're smarter than other species. We actually survived because we are social creatures.
No.
And unfortunately, in the West, we see the decline
Yeah, it's
of
like
community.
individualized way more.
Exactly. And that has a price, a mental health price. We already see it. And there will be other costs that we will see down the road. In Gaza community and other global South communities, which are still not that much influenced by the West, you see those traits are still there. And that fabric, that is what keeps the child to have that mentality that there's a bigger meaning, I can survive. And we see it because Gaza was being carpet bombed every 2 or 3 years. in very cruel and violent ways, where Israel would choose to bomb right at 11:30 a.m. when the kids are leaving the school in the streets. So this was intentional. So yet these children, and you see them generation after generation growing up, and despite the atrocities, some have negative consequences and suffer from health outcomes, both in terms of disease or mental health disorders, yes. But if we look at the majority, they cope and they move on because of the meaning making faith, that they are part of something bigger, and because of community, that you have a
Yeah.
social fabric that takes care of you. And there's a lot of research in other genocides, like what happened in Bosnia, in other places, that they showed it's actually the child's mental health. The most important factor is not the war and violence around them, it's having a family that loves you and cares for you. That's more important, to be a buffer to protect the child from the atrocities happening outside. Because what's worse than a war and violence is not having that buffer. And you see that in certain places in the West where you have extreme neglect of the parent or extreme abuse by the parent. And outside, there's no war, there's no violence. But if you have that, that's the worse for a child than anything else.
Yeah.
So I think that, and that's why having that family, that community, and meaning making are a buffer for the child in Gaza today. And of course, that does not let the perpetrators off the hook, to hold them accountable for what they have done, for what they have taken away from this child, so that we ensure, at least if we can, for it not to happen again.
Yeah. Do you think there's a difference? I don't know if there's research done about it, but between epigenetic markers of, like, for example, someone who's been through trauma in the West with an abusive household or something like that, compared to someone in Palestine who has been through the war. Like, is there a difference between the genetic expression of that?
I do not know the answer to that question. That's a fantastic question and very important to study and understand the nuances of the different experiences, how the impact is different. Again, nobody's done that research, but it is, again, epigenetics is a very new field, and that would be a great question to answer.
No. Do you know if there's research, or maybe your own research, that has found that epigenetics markers can be reversed or changed? Like, let's say something, my mother went through something and I carry that in my genes. Am I able to change those markers?
That's the third important question we ask in epigenetics is, can the markers be reversed? Of course, we beg the question, do we want to reverse them or not? I don't know. Right? First of all, because the one I'm proposing for future generations, that's a epigenetic change that makes us adaptable. But maybe the question is for those in your lifetime that accelerate your epigenetic clock. Do we want to reverse those? And probably yes, we do, because they have negative health outcomes. So that's a very important question. And we actually are trying to answer that question. So first of all, I co-led a research project evaluating an intervention that was implemented by an international NGO on Syrian and Jordanian adolescents in Jordan. And the hypothesis was that the Syrian refugee adolescents had accelerated epigenetic aging because of the exposure to war and violence and displacement compared to the Jordanians from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. And the hypothesis was, can the intervention reverse those epigenetic changes? So we had shown, first of all, that, for example, their anxiety and stress was reduced because of the intervention, like from a behavior point of view, by using surveys. The program had claimed that it also not just reduces stress, but actually improves resilience. However, when we developed a resilience success measure or evaluation measure, we were not able to show that resilience was improved in these kids. And the reason was, after we had analyzed the data, is because the program was designed by the West and it was focused on building resilience from an individual point of view, while in our communities, people build resilience because of family and community. And that component was not included in the intervention. Hence, yes, there was a reduction of stress, but there was no improvement in resilience. And then we looked at biomarkers. So we showed that cortisol, which is a stress hormone, actually went down in these kids. But when we went to go further under the skin and look at epigenetic markers, we looked at the epigenetic aging clock. And this data is still not yet published, but what we were able to show is that indeed the epigenetic aging clock was accelerated in the Syrian refugees before the implementation of the intervention. 2 months after the intervention was implemented, we took another sample and we showed that the epigenetic aging clock stopped accelerating for those who were in the program compared to those who were not in the program. All right, so
That's
that
nature.
looked good.
Yeah.
But then we looked a year after to see if that de-acceleration or that protection was maintained. Unfortunately, it wasn't. They went back to accelerate. The epigenetic clock went back to accelerating.
I mean, then it's like an intervention is too short. Like it should be a new way of living or a new way of like let's say those people would have that intervention constantly. Do you think that would have affected the results?
So my hypothesis is that it's connected to resilience, that the intervention was not developed in a way to address the cultural community local context of these children, and because it didn't address the community and the family, the impact of the intervention was not sustainable. And therefore, we started another study looking at another intervention, which is one I had developed 2 decades ago, called We Love Reading. So We Love Reading is an organic, local intervention developed by a refugee for refugees. So it caters to the local context. And it's very simple. It's about training adult and youth to read aloud to children in their native language in a public space, stories from their local culture and context. In a real world experience where it's in person, not using a tablet or a phone, with an adult reading to children. And we hypothesized that this intervention, because it is local and culturally contextual and in the mother tongue and about family and community, that its impact would be not just make a difference, but would be sustainable. So we started the first stages of the research. So we proved that their mental health was improved, their resilience was better. And we collected DNA samples, and we are actually in the process now of analyzing the epigenetic signatures to see if those epigenetic signatures or the accelerated epigenetic clock was deaccelerated and whether it was sustainable over a longer period of time. So you'd have to stay tuned for those results until they come out,
Exactly. Yeah.
in hopefully the near future.
Yeah, but it's so wonderful what you've done with that whole organization. Because how big is it now, the We Love Reading community?
We Love Reading now is in 78 countries around the world. And it's not that we have an office in every country. Now ours is a movement of change, like a butterfly that is, or a good virus, that it moves beyond boundaries and borders, where people have picked it up and started reading in their own native language in their public space, whether it's a church, a mosque, a community center, under a tree, or on the stairs of an apartment building. And slowly, but surely changing mindsets through reading to nurture change makers, whether it's the children or the adults themselves, discovering their own agency, their own leadership skills, solving now in their community other challenges that they face, and passing that on to the community and future generations.
That's beautiful. I'm so curious what the results are going to say.
Me too.
Yeah. If we go back to your own personal life and your own experiences, what do you think has been passed on onto you from the generations before you? Both positive and negative, maybe.
Oh, very good question. I think one of the things that I see in myself is I'm very optimistic. My husband says I see an ocean in a drop of water. And I wonder, where did that come from? And so maybe it's probably something I have inherited from past grandparents, to have this kind of openness and imagination, because it's connected to having an imagination, to imagine something better, and then to make that imagination a reality. So the second thing maybe is being a doer, right? Because a lot of people imagine, but they don't they don't necessarily do what they imagine. And I think I want to say, I think I'm a doer, that if I imagine something, I roll up my sleeves and go do it. And I'm not afraid of failing. So whether that it's a combination of, again, nurture and nature.
Yeah.
It's the environment I've grew up in. It's what I've inherited, whether it's the genes or the epigenetic signatures. And one day maybe we'll try to untangle those two from each other. I don't know. But there will always be plenty of questions to ask and plenty of explorations to undertake.
Yeah. Because your career has been so incredibly important and so I think people would not call it a straight line. Like, you are both a mom of 4 children, but you're also a really incredible scientist. You've traveled, you do your own research, you're an entrepreneur, you're a feminist. Like, the list is so long of things that you do and are. How do you think, like, what kind of experience do you think made it possible for you to go your own way? Because this podcast is kind of about people finding their own way. What would you say to people who might be in a similar position to you and are thinking of going their own way, or they are curious about something? They might have a question like you had a question, but they're unsure how to pursue it or what to do about it. Like, what made you believe you could go your own way?
That's a very important question. I think, first of all, a person has to trust themselves. Build your confidence in yourself, trust yourself, and think, wait, I'm as smart as anyone else. If I have a question, let me ask it. And again, if it turns out somebody answered it, okay, that means I had a really good question since somebody else asked it. And if nobody asked it, then let me be that person to ask it. So to build the confidence and trust in yourself that I am worthy, I'm different, I'm special, just because I have a different DNA than anyone else. And that means everybody's special. And therefore, I have the right to ask these questions. I think that's number one. Number two is, yes, you may encounter circumstances where you cannot pursue that question. And that's, of course, and that happened to me as well. I wanted to be a scientist, and I tried to get into a university to have a PhD, and I did, but I didn't have the money to go. So I stayed in Jordan, I got married, I became a school teacher for 10 years. So write down your thoughts and your questions on a notebook or something and keep it, because you never know when the right time will come and you can go back to that question and ask it. And it's not like the end of the world if you couldn't answer it the moment it came to you. It's just, it wasn't the right time.
Yeah.
So from that, therefore, consider everything that happens in your life as a new experience to learn from. So if it wasn't your question originally, you could find a new question in the experiences you're going through now, right? So think, what am I learning? What can I observe in these circumstances that I cannot control, but instead turn it into a learning experience, right? That requires a little bit of an imagination, but that's the way to do it, because you can't control it, but you can control how you think about it.
Yeah.
And then you turn it into a learning experience, a creative experience. And later on in life, when you look back, you will realize, as I did, that that was very important for who I am today. So yes, I didn't go to the university when I wanted to as soon as I graduated. I got married and was a school teacher. But now looking back, that time being a school teacher was so important for honing and building who I am, understanding children, understanding parents. Having my 4 children at that time was a huge experience that was so important for me as a human being. Being a mom, taking care of children, dealing with the ins and outs. We underestimate that. We take it for granted. Everybody's a mom or a dad, and that's normal. No, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's you're doing the most important job a human being can do, producing the next generation, caring for the next generation. And we think that's nothing. No, it is the most important thing. So again, if somebody else could have said, oh my God, I lost my opportunity, I had to be a mom, as if it's negative. So it's about taking that experiencing, what have I learned from it, celebrating it, and trying to make it the best you can, finding something in everything. Again, finding an ocean in a drop of water. And lastly, life is long. What you can't do today that you thought you wanted to, but the circumstances didn't allow you, you have it on your notebook. So in 10 years and 20 years, when the right time comes, maybe first you'll realize that wasn't what you wanted. And that's okay. But you'll have other things that you came up. But also, like I said, life is long. At 30, at 40, at 50, I can't wait till I'm 60. I have a whole list of things I want to do. So that spirit that life is open, life is there. There are different things you can do, so long as you have that openness to embrace the people around you, the experiences around you, and to consider each encounter a new adventure to learn and to share and to reflect.
That's beautiful. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I end each episode with fire away questions. So that means I just ask a bunch of questions, and the first thing that pops up in your brain is the answer. So there's no right or wrong. And the first question is, what is one small daily habit that has improved your mental well-being?
I pray. I pray 5 times a day. And that, especially the one in the early morning, that gives me clarity and focus and purpose.
Beautiful. What's a book or a movie you would recommend everyone to read or watch, and why? Except for your own. I'll recommend that later too, but
No, with what's going on in Gaza today, I recommend reading the book by Muhammad al-Kurd, Perfect Victims, because he unapologetically talks about being Palestinian, being proud of who we are, and not falling into the trap of the colonizer who wants us to cater, to be nice, to sugarcoat things so that we earn a place at the table. And he is so bold and confident in saying, I don't have to earn a place at the table. This is our right. And how do you go about doing that?
yeah, that's beautiful. I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna add it to my list. What is one piece of advice you would give young adults who are feeling overwhelmed by the pressures and uncertainties of life?
Life is long. Life is long. Don't worry. Enjoy what you have today. And it's that balance between the micro and the macro. Life is long, but enjoy what you have today and try your best. And if you fail, it's okay. Consider it a learning experience. Don't call it failure. Think, okay, now I know I shouldn't do that. And just make sure you don't do the same mistake again. Do a new mistake.
Exactly. What is the best piece of advice that someone else ever gave you?
Two occurred to me. One was, if bad things happen to you, one person told me, because I did encounter many challenges, and some of them were a little bit devastating, nothing compared to what's happening in Gaza. Everything that becomes little compared to that. But she told me, Rana, what happened to you in the future, you're going to see that it was all for the best, that it happened to you for a reason. And out of it, you will see how you have grown and changed for the better. So that's one. And the other piece of advice is, sometimes I get invited to a lot of things to speak. And I think, wait a minute, who am I? I'm just another person. I feel like, why are they inviting me? And then she told me, no, Dana, it's not about you. Get over yourself. You are a role model for certain people. So just own it, talk about it, because other young women and young men around the world see in you something that they don't normally see. So get over yourself and get out there.
I love that. That's beautiful. The last one is, if you had to describe in one sentence what you hope to give to this world, what would that be?
The power of standing by the truth, whatever the cost is.
Mm. I just want to say thank you for this conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was really inspirational, and you've given me a lot of things to think about in terms of the West compared to the Middle East, and the difference between community and the individualistic societies. And I really enjoy your perspective on seeing human beings as resilient and as being able to survive a lot of things instead of being the victims of trauma. So thank you for giving that perspective and for your time. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it too.
Thank you for inviting me. And that the word for that resilience in Arabic is sumud. And it's going to
Sumut?
be sumud. It's a new term we're going to start using to describe how we survive, thrive, and go forward into the future.
I like that. All right, well, I'm going to hear a lot about Sumut then.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you did, please like, subscribe, or share with others. Thank you.